In this video I'll show you how to take the figure that we originally created in Davis and have then edited and annotated in Inkscape and export that in different vector and bitmap file formats to suit whatever application of that figure you have. In this video we're going to be taking the annotated drawing you can see here that we made in Inkscape in the previous video and exporting it in different file formats for different purposes. So here is the image we took the last time. You'll see it sitting still on a document which is the size of an A4 page. So the first thing we want to do is to shrink the document size until it fits the image precisely, because otherwise some of the image formats when we export them will export something the size of the page and the image will only be a small part of that. So let's shrink the document size down to the image, and we do that by going to the File menu, Document Properties, which will pop up this box. In Custom Size you've got one of the options here, Resize Page to Content. So we just click that button and now the document has shrunk to meet the drawing size inside it, and we can close the document properties box down. And then if we hit 5, remember that zooms so that the document fills the screen. That's the full-sized or the document being zoomed to fill the screen optimally. Okay, so now we have our completed figure. Let's try exporting it in some different vector file formats, and I'll explain why as we go along. So the first one I think we'll do is, we've already got it, actually I'll just resave it, resave the SVG file just now because we want to go back to that, but let's now save it as a different file type. So if you go File, Save As, and then you drop down the bottom, you can see all the different types of file that you can export from Inkscape, and there's rather a lot of different ones there. Some of them are more useful than others, however. So let's choose one of these. It's called the Enhanced Meta File. So it has the extension EMF, and that's a vector file format, and that's very useful because that's one that can be used by PowerPoint and Word and other Microsoft programs. So if we export that graph as an EMF one, it has some options here: convert text to paths, various other options. I would just keep the standard ones in there. So we'll click OK. And now if we go to PowerPoint, we just have a blank slide, we can put that box in there. So here we have that, sorry, the figure in there. So 2018 basis graph annotated EMF, we just double click that. It will import that in, and because that is a vector file, although it's only 15 centimeters wide, so it looks small on this slide. Remember, it is a vector file, so it is completely scalable. If we just drag this handle at the edge, we can make that fill the screen with no loss of resolution. And if I had this set up to be a custom slide size, imagine you're making a poster in PowerPoint. Let's just say it's an A3 poster for the sake of argument. We zoom out to see the whole thing. If we wanted to make a huge figure on there, there you go. You see I can scale the whole thing. It's now on an A3 page and it's still not pixelated. So that's the benefit of importing scientific figures like this as vector files when you're making posters. And we did that in this case with an EPS file. If we, sorry, an enhanced meta file, an EMF file. If we go back to Inkscape File, Save As, there's another option in there which is Windows meta file WMF. That one is also importable into Microsoft products. So if we go back to that PowerPoint, create another slide, now we've got the WMF version as well. And as with the enhanced meta file, that is fully scalable with no loss of resolution because it's a vector format file rather than a bitmap one. So if we go back to Inkscape, we have some other options. We can do File, Save As. We can save that as a PDF, which can be useful sometimes. Again, you'll have some options, but by and large I tend to keep the default options in there. And then if we go into that folder, we've got the PDF version there, and that will open up in your standard PDF viewer. And again, you can change this to different sizes and it will suffer no loss of resolution again because it's a vector format file. The last one we'll look at is the one that you'd use for the journal articles that require you to have figures as EPS or encapsulated PostScript. Again, in Inkscape you go File, Save As, and on this option down here, EPS is one of the options there. Again, I tend to keep the default settings, so just click OK, and in that folder we now also have the EPS file, which is what you'd submit to journals. So those are the different options. Remember, we could save the Inkscape annotated graph as an SVG file, so that's SVG as a vector format, and that's the one that stores the most information for use in Inkscape. But we could also save it as an enhanced metafile or a Windows metafile. Both of these options were good for importing stuff into Microsoft Office products like Word and PowerPoint. You can export it as PDF, which is also a vector format and maintains the vector character of the figure. And then finally as the EPS or encapsulated PostScript file, which is what you'd need to submit to journals. Now there are occasions when you might want to export a bitmap image from PowerPoint, not from PowerPoint, from Inkscape. And that can also be useful, particularly if, for example, you've imported, if we'd gone to File, Import and imported a photograph in here, we may still want to use Inkscape to annotate a photograph and provide arrows to specific areas and notes about specific areas on the photograph. We would then perhaps want to save that as a bitmap file in order to get a good rendering of the photograph to upload onto a journal. So if we mark the whole document by doing Control A, and then if we go File, Export PNG image, so PNG is Portable Network Graphic, and it's a style of bitmap image, and that pops up this box here, so we can export the whole page or the drawing or the selection or some custom part of the screen. In this case we've selected everything, so we'll keep it on selection. You have control down here of the image size, but more importantly the resolution. So remember, for journals you need to be able to export things at 300 or even better 600 dots per inch, depending on the requirements of the journal. If you're only putting something on a monitor, then 90 or 150 dots per inch is good enough. But for this one, let's export it at a high quality that would be useful for a journal. So we can set the number of dots per inch specifically here, remembering that we've also set the size very specifically before. Remember, we set it to 15 centimeters wide, so we've got the size set specifically and the number of dots per inch, the image resolution set specifically, and this would be in order to match the requirements of whatever journal we were planning to submit to. Then we have to choose where to save the file. So if we save that to, I'll just save it to here. So bitmap image.png, and then you actually have to click export to export it. And then if we go that image is here. Okay, and that will have exactly the right image resolution and size. Now for the journals, remember, they weren't mostly accepting a PNG image, they were accepting images in other formats, commonly JPEG or TIFF. So let's see how we convert this exported PNG image to a JPEG or a TIFF image, and to do that we'll use the program GIMP. So if we right click here and go to open with, oh, GIMP's not an option there, in which case I'll just open it from here. Sometimes it's a little slow to start up. open, and we'll scroll to there. There's that one. So we'll open that up in GIMP, and there we have the image in GIMP. And now if we go to File, Export As, we can export that as a TIFF file. So if you just write TIFF, TIF or TIFF, I would say you have to be a bit careful here, because sometimes I've noticed the websites, when you're uploading figures to journals, differentiate between the file extension TIF and the file extension TIFF. So you may need to change the file extension to match what the journal's asking for, even though both of them will contain exactly the same TIFF file. TIFF incidentally stands for Tagged Image File Format. And it will ask us if we want to compress it, so LZW is a good way of compressing things, which makes the image a little bit smaller, and then we can just hit export. And now if we look in there, we will have a TIFF image. If we go back into GIMP, we can also file, export as, and to change to a different file format, all you do is you change the file extension, so JPG, save it as a JPEG, and GIMP will do the changing to the different format for you. And 90% quality is the normal thing for JPEG, so again I'd just keep that as default and then hit export. And again, if we look in here now, we'll now have a JPEG image. So we have a JPEG, a PNG and a TIFF. If we just jump to the PowerPoint we had earlier and we create a new slide, so let's open up the PNG first. That was the one we made first. And then if I rescale that to the full size, then we can load up the TIFF. And then finally we can load up the JPEG. And you can see these do contain the image, but you'll notice, for example, the edges of this spectral peak here have become a little aliased. You see how the line isn't a constant width. And that's one of the issues potentially with expanding these bitmap formats. We go up, you see you have the same problem in the TIFF file and in the PNG file, although none of them are completely identical. You can see if we switch this area here, looks different in the TIFF file than it does in the JPEG. And none of them look as good as the version that was in the vector format. Although I noticed this dashed line has turned into a solid line. Interesting, which it hasn't in the EMF version. So it looks like the enhanced metafile version was working better here. But anyway, that was how you can use GIMP to change your exported bitmap file format into TIFF or JPEG format, whatever you need at the particular time. And that, I think, concludes this exercise. So hopefully you'd now be able to create this figure using Davis and then Inkscape to the annotations, and then export that in vector file formats using Inkscape, or various bitmap formats using Inkscape to begin with to produce a PNG file, and then GIMP to convert that PNG file to TIFF or JPEG as necessary.